Hey guys, Jake Quinsee here, and I'm giving you a card choice tier list. These cards are performing very well at events recently in the current format that we're in. This tier list is designed for YCS Philly this week, the UK National Championships, and the National Championships up and coming. Probably going to get ban lists before Nationals or the European Championships, US Nationals that is. These card choices will obviously change moving forward, but these cards are giving players a huge edge in events that they're playing in. So I'm going to break down what you should consider playing in the main deck, the side deck. There's a few cards in there that I wouldn't play, cards that I would play. I'm going to give you my reasonings for why you should play these cards. The top three deck, Purrely, Super Heavy Samurai, and obviously Kashtira. These decks are destroying Nationals, and you do have a few Sprite variants. They did take a few Nationals. The cards that you play in these decks will carry you moving forward in the event. You need to think about the tech choices that you're playing and the power cards that you're playing. These are the cards that will make you win these certain matchups, and especially the mirror matches. So this video would be very important for players who want to do specifically well this weekend at YCS Philly, Nationals, and again, up and coming Nationals. Any type of cards that you feel like I've missed out on or you'd like my opinion on, leave them below. All right, without further ado, I'm going to get straight into the video. And if you guys could do one more thing for me, if you please click that subscribe button. Nearly half of you aren't subscribed to the channel, and I'm going to keep posting types of videos like this in the future. All right, guys, let's get into it. Now, let's start off with Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. This card's a great hand trap. It's been a great hand trap for years. I do think eventually this card should probably see a hit on the list just because of how good it is. But I guess Konami like it in the format because, or in the game, just because it can hit every deck and everyone can play it. So the card's great. Is it one of the best hand traps this format? Probably not. Would I play it in the main deck? Yes, but that only comes with if you have space. If you don't have space in the main deck, I probably wouldn't include this at all. You could include it in the side deck because this card's very, very good against Branded, and it probably is one of the best cards against Branded if you play against it. So I would probably include it in the side deck rather than the main deck if you are lacking space. But I do think it should be included in the main deck if you have space. If you're playing like Super Heavy Samurai, it should be included. Purrely, however, though, I'd like to go a different way with Purrely. I probably wouldn't play it in Purrely. I'd rather play other cards in there, such as like Lava Golem or Nibiru over it. Now I'm going to get into that because these cards are on that tier list. But yeah, I'm going to say it's strong in the main. I wouldn't say it's 100%, but it's a very, very good hand trap. Now, Book and Moon. Book and Moon is surprisingly seeing a lot more play, and that's because it is very good against Kashtira, which we know about, but also Super Heavy Samurai. Now, this card is a very good card going first. It's very good because if you go against Super Heavy Samurai, you can book the Soul Piercer. They can't really do much. Very similar, like you can book the Unicorn. They can't really do much from that point of view. So it stops them, it stuns them, they can't continue. Book is also good at going second against a few of the decks. Not great against Super Heavy Samurai, but unless you go first. But also, it's very good against Kashtira, because if they go Arise Heart and pass, you can just Book and Moon it. No one's really playing Lance right now, so Book and Moon is very good. In Purrely, this card is very strong. It allows you to OTK. It's another good way against the mirror match as well if you are playing Purrely. I do like Book and Moon. And if you are playing Purrely, I do think this should be in your deck list this weekend. I do think if you're playing Kashtira, you should be remaining free as well. If you are playing Purrely and you are playing Kashtira, this should be 100% in your main deck. Now, we are going to have a few issues with the tier list because some of the cards shouldn't be included in your deck list and some should. So, with that being said, this is 100% main in Purrely. Looking at Book and Moon as well, obviously you can't include it in Super Heavy Samurai, so that would just not be a card to include in there. So when I'm giving my reasonings on some of these cards, just take note that it doesn't apply to all the decks, but as I'm explaining them, I'll tell you which decks you should play them in. Now the Bestials. These cards are very good in the side deck. They target Mathmech, they target Branded. They're pretty strong. They apply a lot of pressure as well when you play them, and they put more damage on board. These cards, obviously, I'm referring to Magma and Joyous Worm. That's the combination you would play. Some players are playing 3 and 1, and they're playing 2 and 2. Now, I prefer 2 and 2 because if you do open Magma and Joyous Worm, you can summon 2 dragons in their turn. Then you can search another Joyous Worm during the end phase, and then you can summon it in your turn, so you got 7,200 damage on board. These cards are really strong. I do think they should be included. They'll be very good for Nationals, but in the YCS, they'll be slightly weaker. However, though, they'll still be a strong side deck option for the events. Next, we have Dark Ruler No More. Now, in theory, this card should be very good against Super Heavy Samurai, but let's think about it. This card is only going to be sided. You won't main it. You can main it, And if you main it against Super Heavy Samurai when you're going second, it will be very strong and you should win the game. But if you are going second post side, now this is where your opponent will be siding Spell Cancer and Sayuja Skuldred. When they side these in and when they summon Spell Cancer, your Dark Ruler no more is dead now. It'll just be a dead card in your hand and you probably wish it would be a Kaiju, a Lava Golem, or a Sphere mode. I wouldn't say this is that strong anymore, so I probably would say it is in the weak main option. Next, we have Dimensional Barrier. Dimensional Barrier covers a lot of matchups. It'll always be a strong trap because it can prevent summoning, which is a very strong lingering mechanic, and it also can negate the monster's effects that are on the field. It's basically a card that will be very strong always when you go first post side. This card should in some ways be included in your side deck just because it gives you good coverage. It's good against Purrely. It can be alright against Kashtira. Super Heavy Samurai can stop them syncering, and Branded, obviously it'll hit Branded the most because it stops them fusioning. Where would I put Dimensional Barrier? I would say it's a strong side deck option if you have space this weekend, especially the National Championships, because Nationals brings in a lot more diverse decks compared to YCSs. YCSs will specifically target Purrely, Super Heavy Samurai, and Kashtira. Obviously in the earlier rounds you'll have weaker decks, but in the later rounds you'll have more of those decks. Compared to Nationals, you'll have just a wide spread of decks, the majority of the Swiss rounds, and even in Top Cut. And then in Top Cut, that's where you'll see the majority of the top 3 decks. Dimensional Barrier is in the strong side option. Now, Dimensional Shifter. This card is a really strong card. It's surprisingly made a card like this, but the card is great. This card should be played in Kashtira in the main deck for sure. It's 100% main if you're playing Kashtira. It should be in the main deck, 100%. Would any other deck play it? Obviously Flu, cool, they can play it, but Flu's not a deck you should be taking right now to any of these events. So Dimensional Shifter, yes, 100% main if you're playing Kashtira. If you are playing Sprite variants, you should actually main it. Kashtira and Sprite variants, I would recommend maining it unless you're playing like a runic version or even like a live twin version. You will see this a lot in the side decks for Sprite, so it's strong in the side for Sprite. For Kashtira specifically, it's 100%. So we can really just put it up here, but I'm gonna put it in the strong main just because I don't want people to get confused and see like if they skip ahead and they'll be like, oh, it's Jake says it's 100% main deck. Now, Drolling Lockbird. Drolling Lockbird targets a lot of the decks. It's a very strong card now. A lot of the main decks are playing this card in freeze. This card is actually better than Ash Blossom right now. It just stuns a lot of the decks and it stops them playing on. Now, if you think about Super Heavy Samurai, best card against it. Just stops them searching, which then prevents them leading up to a Pendulum Summon. It's also really good against Kashtira. Now, if Kashtira just go Field Spell, search Unicorn, and you draw them, it's not looking good for them. Droll is very strong. I would say this is 100% in your main deck. You should include this weekend and events coming up. This card is very, very strong. Just be careful that people are playing Gamma as well. So if you use it, if you use it at a point where your opponent doesn't have control of monster, they could have Gamma. But just remember, it's 1 in 3 times that they open Gamma at this point. So don't feel like you can't Droll just to get full value. You are just turning on Gamma if they have Gamma, the 1 in 3 time. Next, we have Effect Veiler. Now, Effect Veiler always will be a hand trap that sees play. This hand trap has a few restrictions, though, that players should take note. Now that everyone's playing Drollbird in the main deck, people are trying to play around triggering Drollbird by using card effects in the draw phase. When you use card effects in the draw phase, Drollbird can't be triggered at this point. Players then are using effects in the draw phase rather than the main phase. Veiler can only be used in the main phase. So this card isn't as good as it used to be. However, the Ghost Mourner lets you negate cards during the draw phase, standby phase, the main phase, the battle phase, etc. Mourner is actually better than Veiler. I wouldn't say it's the strongest main option. If you're playing Super Heavy Samurai, this should be included. This card obviously as well can't be used if there is a Kashtira Rise Heart in the field, just because it has to be sent to the graveyard. Where Mourner, you can just discard it. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Veiler. I mean, we could put it in the weak main option compared to Mourner. So I'm going to do that. I think Mourner should be the strong main and weak main would be Veiler. So Mourner should be included in your deck list. This card's very strong. It applies pressure as well because it inflicts damage to your opponent if that monster leaves the field, but mainly because it can be used in each phase. So this card is way better than Effect Veiler right now. Next, we have Evenly Matched. Now, Evenly Matched saw a lot of play leading up to the national season because a lot of decks didn't leave a negation on board and get full value and usually win the game. And that's why we saw a lot of players maining Evenly Matched in the previous format, especially for the YCS 250. This card isn't as good as it used to be just because look at all the negations boards are leaving up. Players aren't committing as many cards as they did before because they're playing hand traps now. These hand traps obviously don't commit to the field, so Evenly's not as good. So with that being said, Evenly isn't very good right now. It's a weak main option, it's a weak side option. Next, we have Harpy's Feather Duster. If you're playing Nationals, I do think this card should be in your 55 just because this card targets trap decks. Because you'll see more of those decks in these tournaments, this should be in your side deck for sure. It's a strong side deck card. It just clears back rows. And yes, even though, like I said, with Evenly, there's more hand traps being played, but in the trap decks, they play less hand traps, they play more actual traps. So this card is something that you would like to see. So I'm going to put it in the strong side option. Then we have Gamma Seal. We are seeing a lot more monster removal like Kaijus again, which is nice to see. These cards clear like Gnaw, which is a problem. Rise Heart, which also a problem. It can clear your opponent's Baron. So yes, this card is pretty decent. Do I think it's a strong main option? Not really. Obviously, if you're playing Super Heavy Samurai, you should definitely play Machine Kaiju for sure, 100%. This card, I'm not a huge fan of it. I would rather play Santa Claus. But then again, it comes down if you're playing Purrely and you want to make with Zeus. Yes, this card isn't a strong main option. Is it a strong side option? You could go with a strong side option because a lot of these decks, especially the top deck, are making a monster which is hard to deal with. And if you need to use your graveyard and a Rise Heart on the field, then a Kaiju will come in nicely. I'm going to say this is a weak side option because I do think there's better cards that you should be playing over this. Better cards than Kaijus, and they are in the tier list still. So I'll be going over them when we hit them. Next, we have Ghost Bell. Now, Ghost Bell is a card I probably wouldn't include in your main deck. It just doesn't hit enough. You'd rather play like a card like Ash Blossom over this, just because it hits and targets more decks in the current format. However, though, this card is a great side deck card. It obviously is very good against Branded. It's very good against Mathmech. It can be good against a few of the Runic decks you might see at Nationals and even at the YCS in the earlier rounds. So yes, this card is definitely a strong side deck option. Then we have Ghost Ogre. Now, Ghost Ogre is very, very, very strong against Purrely. It's very strong against Super Heavy Samurai. It can be okay against Kashtira. And now these are the top 3 deck, but it's not amazing against Kashtira. Just remember, though, if they have Rise Heart in the field, you can't use this. You need to use this at a point when they have just Unicorn or Fenrir on the field. So if they go like Unicorn, search Theosis, play Theosis, summon Fenrir, then Fenrir effect to search. This is probably the point where I would Ogre. They get Rise Hearts to hand, and yes, on a separate chain on resolution, they could trigger the Unicorn, see your extra, and see what you're playing. But at this point, it makes it much more harder for them to be able to continue with their plays. That's the point where you should use Ogre. Now, Ogre is definitely a 100% card you should be maining this weekend in free. This card is very strong. It will serve you very well, and I'd be surprised if it doesn't. Next, we have Infinite Impermanence. Infinite Impermanence is just a great generic card. This card doesn't turn on cards like Triple Tactics Talents and Triple Tactics Thrust because it's a trap card. This card can be played multiple times a turn as well. So if you open 2, unlike the Ghost Girls, you only use them once per turn. You can use this if you open 2, which will happen once or twice during the tournament that you're playing in, especially if you run to the deeper ends of the tournament. I do like Impermanence. I do think it should be included in your main deck. Playing Super Heavy Samurai, I wouldn't play it. It just gives you great coverage. And also, if you're playing against Purrely and then make a big Zeus, this will come in clutch in the later in the game. So I do think this is a strong main card. Would I say 100%? Not 100, but definitely a strong main card. Next, we have the Kurikara. Now, this card is seeing a lot more play, and rightly so. This card's very strong against Kashtira, very strong against Super Heavy Samurai, and obviously very strong against Purrely. I would main this. If I'm going this weekend, and if I expect I'm running deep in the event, I'm maining this card 100%. Now, I do think this card should definitely be in your 55. If you're not maining it, you should be siding it. Just think about it. This card applies a lot of pressure to your opponent. It prevents what they're trying to do. And also, it can literally win you the game by itself because you can just reborn your opponent's strongest monster from their graveyard and use it against them. And that alone would just win you the game. So yeah, I would play this. I would definitely play this. I'm saying it's 100% main deck. Now, Lava Golem. This is a card I think should be banned. And I think Sphere Mode should be banned. Now, Kaijus are very different. I think Kaijus are fine because it's a 1-for-1 replacement and your opponent gets a monster in trading of that, right? Yes, they do with Lava Golem as well, but Lava Golem clears 2 monsters and Sphere Mode clears 3 monsters. It's not nice playing against this card. It's very hard to play around, and sometimes you usually will have to go second. I do think this card, yes, should get banned. This card actually should be played. If you're playing Purrely, I would main it this weekend. The card is very strong. If you go first, you just discard it. If you go second, you just annihilate your opponent. A Rise Heart pass is very weak now compared to the full Kashtira board or going Diabolus board and just ripping your opponent's cards from them. This card should be included in your main deck if you're playing Purrely, 100%. If you're not playing Purrely, I probably wouldn't main it, but I definitely would side it. I'm going to put it in the strong side option for sure. Now we have Lightning Storm. Lightning Storm will see more play this format, especially for Nationals and the YCS, because you want your battle phase. You also want to be able to clear away cards and force them out. This card is very versatile as well because it can hit the trap decks and also hit the combo deck. This card isn't like evenly matched. This tied in with like triple tactics talent is very strong. I do like Lightning Storm. I do like what it offers. I do like the coverage it offers as well for events. I would say it's a strong side deck option for this weekend and events coming up. Now, Nibiru, the Primal Being. This card hadn't seen much play leading up to the format, but now it's seeing a ton more. I would like to see this in main decks just because I think it'll be very strong. Players don't respect it. Players still play into it. And players lose games because of it. If you're playing Purrely, again, it's like a Lava Golem scenario. If you draw it and you go first, you can just discard it from the spell. No problem. If you go second, you can clear the board and then you're all good to go. So yeah, I do think this should be 100% main deck. Again, it just comes down to space, but for what it can offer you, it's just a no-brainer. Purrely will be the least represented deck in the top 3, meaning that this card is just even better, especially against the top 2 deck. Next, we have Retaliating Sea. Now, this card is very strong against Purrely. Obviously only a really strong side deck card. Would I include it in the main decks? Obviously not. Very similar to like Contact C, just something I wouldn't really include in the main deck. It can be okay against Branded as well, but there are other cards that I would probably play instead of it. However, if you're playing like Super Heavy Samurai, and because obviously you can only really play monsters, with a few exceptions, you could side like maybe like Anti-Spell even in your Super Heavy Samurai deck, then yes, this card is something that I probably would see in the side deck, depending on the type of deck that you're playing. Contact C, very similar. Card's very good against Purrely. You have to use this as the XYZ material. So it's pretty strong. So yeah, so I mean, the strong side, especially if you're expecting a lot of Purrely, I probably wouldn't prioritize it that much though over other side deck cards. However, there's something that you should consider. Now we have Santa Claus. Santa Claus is a strong option, especially for Purrely because it goes into defense mode, rather than the Kaiju puts in attack mode, which means you can attack with your weak monster, make a big Zeus. This card is pretty decent. It's seeing a lot more play. And yes, the downside, your opponent will get to draw in the end phase, but let's be real, how often does that happen? Especially in this format. The format's very fast paced. That's not really going to happen, right? Where would Santa Claus go? Yes, it's a strong side option. In some ways, it could be a strong main option, but again, I'd rather play Lava Golem. If you're playing like against some of the weaker Kashtira players who just goes Rise, Heart, Pass, then yes, it's nice against them. I'm going to say it's a weak side. It's a weak main option. I wouldn't main it. It's definitely weak main. Definitely weak main. Weak side probably because you'd rather have cards like Lava Golem and like Kurikara. And Nibiru. I think these cards are just way better. And you got to think about how much space that you really have for these tech choices. You could really put it in the strong side as well. My instincts are telling me that we just don't have enough space for these decks. Well, the decks don't have space for all of these cards, so it probably would put it in the weak side option. Red Lotus. Now, this card is a great going first card because obviously you got to look at your opponent's hand and remove a card. Now, you got to think about this card in this current format. It's very different to what it was before. Before, you committed a lot of your cards to the field, and obviously you'd have to have a card remaining in your hand to resolve this effect. But this time, we're playing a lot more hand traps in the format. This card gets weaker. The reason why it gets weaker is because when you remove a card from your opponent's hand, you reveal your hand, and now they can see the hand traps they need to play around. This can cost you the game. Being able to play as well, you're likely to get hand trapped because there's more hand traps in the format. So if your opponent's hand traps you and stops you, yes, you're going to be setting Red Lotus, playing it, taking their card that they can stop them playing, hoping they don't have another card to let them play, and now they see what hand traps to play around. And I just don't think it's good enough as it used to be. This card is still very strong. It's a card I probably just wouldn't include. I just don't think you have enough space for it. If you are, though, playing Kashtira, it should definitely be in your side deck because you don't want to be Kaiju, you don't want to be Lava Golemed. If you are playing Purrely, you probably could play it. Oh, man. Thinking more on that, yeah, it is a strong side option just because if the format adapts to where I think it could in the next few weeks, where Kaiju's are seeing more play or Lava Golem seeing more play, then yeah, it is strong. But then again, it doesn't stop Nibiru, it doesn't stop Kurikara. So if you're playing Nibiru and Kurikara, obviously Lotus gets weaker. If you're playing cards like Lava Golem, then Red Lotus gets stronger. So you know what? With that being said, I'm just going to put it in the weak side option unless you are playing Kashtira. Then we have Triple Tactics Talent. Now this card is so strong. The card should go to 1. I'm pretty sure it will go to 1. In a hand trap format, it gives you a lot of power. It gives you a lot of edges. If you go first, you either draw 2 cards if you can't continue playing, so you can find a way to keep playing, or you just look at your opponent's hand, remove an additional hand trap that is a problem for you, and then you keep playing, or you just take their starter, and then you just win the game from there. and then now they're top decking. So this card should definitely see space in your deck list in 55 for sure. How many copies would you play? Right now, I think you should definitely play 2. Some decks I would play 3. You just want to see it. You want to open it. You want to draw it. So yes, I probably would play 3, to be completely honest. Do I think it should be in your main deck? Yeah. Is it 100%? Yeah. Obviously, if you're not playing Super Heavy Samurai, but this should 100% be in your list. I wouldn't play any events right now without this card in my deck list, in my main deck specifically. It's just too good. Don't disregard being able to look at your opponent's hand. Now, before, people didn't really do it that much, but now, obviously, people are starting to do it more because of the hand traps in the format. That effect is so important because, and it's so valuable, it gives you your information in your opponent's hand. So don't neglect that. Use it more often than drawing 2. Don't be too greedy. Just think to yourself, do I need to draw these 2 cards? Can I make a decent board regardless? And if yes, don't draw, look at the hand. However, though, if you want to draw hand traps and you're lacking hand traps in your hand, now this card gets even better because you can draw hand traps if you're playing a lot of them. So drawing 2 now is probably better than it used to be just because they play more hand traps. But if you need a way to play and your opponent's hand trapped you already and you can still play, but you're going to get stopped by another hand trap, then you just look at their hand and remove a hand trap from them. Cool. Now, Triple Tactics Frost, not very good right now. I wouldn't play it. Really isn't great unless you're against, like, let's say Branded, for example, and then you can set Dimensional Barrier. I'm not a huge fan of it right now. It will see play and it'll be very good eventually. That's for sure. Right now, terrible. I wouldn't play it. Next, we have Vanity's Fiend. Really strong. Very underrepresented, not respected, and very damaging. Like, if you get paired against this, horrible. Because you can't Kaiju, you can't Lava Golem. Like, the only real thing that's really good against this is Book of Moon. Imperm, that's nice against it as well. But just imagine being paired up against this. It's horrible to play against. The cards are really strong. Would you main it? No, because it's only good when you go first. You're kind of gambling maining it. You're increasing that variance, which you shouldn't need to be doing. So I would say it's a strong side option. Definitely consider it. Next, and finally, we have Anti-Spell Fragrance. This card's disgusting. What this card can do is very damaging if you're playing against it when you go second. It stops your opponent from playing their spell cards the turn. Yes, it then will turn off their Triple Tactics talents. It will turn off any removal because obviously you're siding it in. If they side in Lightning Storm or Feather Duster, just turns it all off. Against Super Heavy Samurai, they're going to struggle because they can't play anything in the Pendulum Scales. So they're going to struggle to out it. Against Purrely, I mean, yeah, they in some ways struggle against it, but it's probably something that I wouldn't say great against Purrely, really, unless you've got established a strong board. I mean, if you're playing like Super Heavy Samurai, then cool, yeah. This paired with Baron and like Firion, pretty strong. I would actually side it in Super Heavy Samurai because once you make your board and you have this, or make it like a Sapar board after being hand trapped and have this, it's just GG. Because how many times have you made Baron and it gets taken? If you're not playing this in Super Heavy Samurai, obviously play Spell Canceller, very strong. But yeah, I actually like this card. I actually think it's a strong side option. This concludes the card choice tier list. I hope it all makes sense. Yes, there was a lot of me talking, but I had to get all the points across. If you like this type of content, let me know. I might do one leading up to Euros and US Nationals, and I might do one post YCS Philly or leading up post the ban list if we get one. If you like this type of content, let me know, and I'll see you guys in the next one.